What's going on YouTube? Diddy here, and I am excited to be bringing you yet another Pokemon trading card game online deck analysis and some examples with that deck. So, if you're excited to see how I've been successful using a fighting type deck that is pre-rotation on September 1st, feel free to show some love on that like button down below, hit that like, comment, subscribe, etc. You know, anything helps as I try to increase the abilities of this channel and make it more successful. So, having said all of that, I'm going to go ahead and describe the cards and the choices that I made when building this deck, heavily influenced by the Furious Fists release, and we'll go ahead and find some matches here in the Pokemon Trading Card Game Online to test it out. So, the deck is primarily built around two Pokemon, one of which is sadly going to be leaving the format here in 5 days, so I wanted to just go ahead and find some, or test out, not test, but actually use this deck a little bit more before I'm unable to use it in the standard format anymore. So, having said all that, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at these cards. So it's built primarily around the Landorus-EX. That's, like I said, going to be leaving the format here. You're probably familiar with this card, but if you are not, it's a basic Pokemon with 180 HP, 2 attacks that are both very competitively viable, I think. The first being the Hammerhead, so for 1 fighting energy, you can hit for 30 damage, as well as to snipe 30 damage to your opponent's benched Pokemon, which is incredibly flexible and usable and great. So, the second is the Land's Judgment, which does 80 damage for 2 fighting and 1 colorless energy. And if you choose to, you can discard all of those fighting energies attached to the Landorus, and then you can hit for an additional 70 damage. So, that's 150 damage for 3 energies, which is pretty incredible. Unfortunately, you have to discard them, but that's not a problem considering we're running 2 copies of the Baby Landorus here with the Shout of Power attack, which allows you to recycle those discarded energies, hitting for 20 damage and attaching a basic energy from your discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon. So some nice synergy there between those two, but I really like to start off with this Landorus, and then if I can discard a couple fighting energies to my discard pile, you can use the Shout of Power to start powering up some of your EX Pokemon on the bench. So basically how that works. The other primary attacker in this deck we'll take a look at is the Lucario-EX, which has 180 HP again, and is very interesting because it actually has 3 attacks, not something we see very often on Pokemon trading cards. All 3 attacks have their own uses, so I'm going to go over all 3 of them. Now, they scale, so the first one only takes 1 fighting energy, the second takes 2, and the third takes 3. Having them require all fighting energy is a little annoying, but since this is a purely fighting type deck, the only energies we are using are fighting energies, so that's not going to impact us in the slightest. So for 1 fighting energy, your Lucario-EX will be able to use the Missile Jab attack, which does 30 damage that is not affected by resistance. Very useful card, particularly if you're fighting an opposing Yveltal deck that resists the fighting type. So I've come across that a lot, and I end up using the Missile Jab quite a bit, and it's pretty successful, so definitely a great attack there. For 2 fighting energies, your Lucario will be able to use the Corkscrew Smash, which does 60 damage and allows you to draw until you have 6 cards in your hand. So amazing draw support from your Lucario-EX here. I probably find myself using the Corkscrew Smash attack the most because it's incredibly useful to draw onto 6 cards. Potentially 6 cards, up to 6 cards. Excuse me. And then for the third attack, for 3 fighting energies, you're going to be using the Somersault Kick, which does 100 damage to your opponent's Pokemon. Probably I don't really use that one the most, or I don't really use that one at all, but it is there if you do want to do additional damage. Now, in addition to all of these Pokemon, we're running a 2-1-2 line of the Machamp, which has the Fighting Fury ability, which just works incredibly well with the rest of the cards in the deck. It allows the damage done by all of your fighting type Pokemon's attacks to be increased by 20. So very powerful ability here, considering all of our Pokemon are fighting type that we're going to be using. It's pretty easy to get these into play as well, which I'll explain in a bit. Just rounding off the other Pokemon in the deck, I'm running 1 copy of the Mega Lucario-EX. Now, it's unfortunate because the Mega Lucario does not have a Spirit Link, but we are still able to draw onto it and use it if we so choose. Several times I've found myself with, my opponent Lysandered out a Pokemon from my bench that has no energy attached to it, and I don't have any energy in my hand or something, so I don't have any way of switching it out, so I might as well just use the turn Mega Evolving a currently powered up Lucario on my bench, getting the Mega Lucario out, because the Mega Lucario is actually not altogether that bad. Sitting at 220 HP with 3 fighting energies in the cost of the Rising Fist attack, it allows you to hit for 140 damage and discard an energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. So if you get this going, that can be pretty devastating, particularly once you have all of the other additional damage in this deck attached to this Lucario. So let's go over those right now, actually. 140 damage there, plus 20 from the Fighting Fury, plus 20 from the Fighting Stadium, which increases the damage of all fighting type attacks by 20. 2 Pokemon EX, I should mention. An additional 20 from the muscle bands that you're going to be attaching to all of your attacking Pokemon, which you're probably familiar with. And then also the Furious Fists released the Special Energy, the Strong Energy, which again increases the damage of all fighting type Pokemon's attacks that it's attached to by 20. So doing some math here, let's say you want to use the Hammerhead from the Landorus, and you have a Machamp with the Fighting Fury ability out on your bench, just one of them. That's an additional 20 there, 20 from the Fighting Stadium if you're facing a Pokemon EX, 20 from the Muscle Band, and 20 from the Strong Energy. You're suddenly pushing that Hammerhead's 30 damage plus the 30 to your benched, or your opponent's benched Pokemon up by 20, 40, 60, 80, so you're hitting for 110 damage onto your opponent's active Pokemon and 30 onto their bench for a single energy, which is absolutely insane and very challenging for your opponents to overcome. Again, since you're only doing 30 with the Missile Jab, if you had all those things in play, you're again doing 110 damage. Or if you're using the Corkscrew Smash, you're doing additional 30 damage, you're hitting for 140 damage to your opponent's Pokemon EX. But if you get 2 Machamps out, which is definitely not unheard of, and I accomplish that all the time, you're hitting for a whopping 160 damage for 2 energy on this Landorus-EX, or excuse me, Lucario-EX. Now, to round off the Pokemon in this deck, I'm running 1 copy of the Jirachi-EX, just a very powerful card, allows you to grab onto a supporter when you play it, and 1 copy of the Shaymin-EX for the draw support of the setup, allows you to draw onto 6 cards. Even though we have the Corkscrew Smash, it's definitely useful to have the Shaymin-EX as well in your deck. Now, how are you going to get this 2-1-2 line of Machamps onto your bench? Well, you have 1 Evo Soda in the deck, which allows you to grab onto the Machoke or the Machamp, respectively. We're also running 2 copies of the Rare Candy to bypass the Machoke, which is why we're running a 2-1-2 line. And in order to grab onto the Machamp and the Rare Candy, you can use the particularly useful Fighting Supporter Karina. It allows you to grab onto a Fighting-type Pokemon and an item card and put them into your hand. So if you've got a Machamp on your bench you played last turn and you want to evolve it this turn, play the Karina, grab onto a Machamp and a Rare Candy, and you're all set. It's that easy. Otherwise, you can always grab onto a Lucario, a Landorus, or what have you, a Muscle Band, you know, something like that. Now, the other trainer cards we have in this deck are fairly standard. We're running 2 copies of the Bicycle, 1 copy of the Computer Search while we still can, 1 copy of the Escape Rope, 1 copy of the Professor's Letter, 1 Startling Megaphone on the off chance we happen to face down a Garbodor in these last 5 days before it's out of the format, 1 Switch, 2 Ultra Balls, again to discard those fighting energies that we have down here, 8 of them, put them into your discard pile, and then you can use the Shadow Power to reattach them to your bench Pokemon. You can do the same with the Computer Search. 2 copies of the VS Seeker, because it's particularly flexible, 1 copy of the Colress, those 3 Karina that I mentioned, 2 Lysanders, 2 Ns, again while we still have them, 2 Professor Birch's Observations, 2 copies of the Professor Juniper, 1 Teammates, which I think we'll be seeing a lot more here in about 5 days, those 2 Fighting Stadiums, those 4 Muscle Bands, and then for the energies, the 4 Strong Energies, and the 8 Fighting Energies that we have there. Now that I've shown you that deck, I'm going to go ahead and find some matches here on the Pokemon Trading Card Game Online with this fighting deck, and we'll see just how well it fares against my opponent's Water-type deck. Looks like I have the option to flip here. I unfortunately was unable to flip the correct decision-making there, so my opponent will be going first here, but not really a problem for us as this deck is very quick to get going, considering that both of our primary attackers are able to hit for 30 damage with a single energy attachment. Now, I was able to draw onto both a Landorus-EX and to a Lucario, and I chose to do the Landorus just because it's able to do more damage with a single energy, as you're able to hit your opponent's active for 30 damage as well as one of their bench Pokemon. But if I had been thinking, I probably should have chosen Lucario because the Landorus does have that nasty water weakness, and my opponent is running an exclusively water-type deck. Fortunately, he's running the Greninja-EX, which only has the sharpshooting attack for a single energy, which doesn't factor in weakness and resistance, and it's going to be a while before he can get the Aqua Blast going, so I might actually be able to knock out his Mudkip from the bench before he's able to get that going, since it will feint to 2 of my attacks, the Hammerheads that is. So I'll go ahead, I drew into a Machamp, which is excellent. I'll lay the Lucario-EX as well, which I meant to do last turn, and I do have the Jirachi in my hand, so I'm going to lay that down, use the Stellar Guidance to grab onto a supporter. I'm actually going to choose the N, just because it's early in the match and I think it's useful, so I'll draw onto that. What I have left in my hand, I have a number of supporters. I'll probably use the Birch's Observations next turn, unless I draw into a Karina, for example, and what I'll do is use the Hammerhead, do 50 damage to my opponent's Greninja, and 30 to that Mudkip. It did 50 instead of, 50 because of the Strong Energy as well, so my opponent attaching a second Water Energy to his Greninja. He also has the Lucky Helmet, which will Whenever the Pokemon this card is attached to is your active Pokemon and is damaged by an opponent's attack, draw 2 cards. So it looks like he drew into 2 cards last turn. That's actually a pretty cool card. I wonder what that card would work the best with in a future deck. Let me know in a comment down below if you have any ideas what the Lucky Helmet synergizes particularly well with. That's our question of the day. So I drew onto another Machamp, which is great. I've got a Fighting Energy, so I'm just going to attach to the Lucario, as it looks like my opponent is actually starting to snipe that with his sharp shooting attack on that Greninja-EX, as he also laid down the Kyogre-EX. So the Kyogre is particularly threatening, considering it's able to hit for just such high damage, especially if it Mega Evolves into Primal Kyogre. So I've got a few things here. I am not going to be able to KO that Machamp because it did evolve it, but I've got the Birch's Observation, so I'll go ahead and use those. Drew onto another Lucario-EX. I'm not sure if I want to play that yet, just because I might want to use a Shaman-EX later. I've got an Ultra Ball, which is nice, a Switch, and a Muscle Band. So I will attach the Muscle Band to my my Landorus-EX. Excuse me. And I would like to discard a few of these cards so I can use the Bicycle this turn. Looks like I will be able to, so I will discard the Fighting Energy, because I can always get that back with a Landorus-EX, or excuse me, just a Landorus if I want to use it. And I don't foresee myself needing a second Lucario, since I already have the Landorus and Lucario out there. So I'm actually just going to discard that, I could draw onto the Shaman, but I might as well just draw onto the Machoke, since I can evolve that this turn, which I think would be a smart decision to do, since I could evolve it next turn then, if I drew onto a Machamp with a supporter card with that VS Seeker. But I'll Bicycle for a couple more cards, and it looks like I got a Machamp right there, so excellent for us, as my Hammerhead's going to be hitting for 70 damage onto that Greninja, and an additional 30 damage onto that Machamp. So one more Hammerhead and that Machamp will cease to exist unless he evolves it into a Swampert this turn. Now, unfortunately, my Landorus is definitely going to be knocked out because he has the Aqua Blast, hitting for 240 damage onto my Landorus, which was inevitable, and we see him taking onto 2 prize cards now, so I'll just go ahead and send out that Lucario-EX. Now, I do have another Landorus, which I will lay down right ahead here. Laid the Machamp down, so I'm going to be doing some additional damage there. And I could play the Colress, draw into 6 cards. I could use the N, however, which I'm going to do. Use the VS Seeker, draw into the N, just so I can get rid of some of those cards attached to, or in my opponent's hand, since he's got an awful lot of them. I have the Special Energy here. I'm going to attach it to the Lucario, since I want to be doing a lot of damage here. With the Strong Energy, I'm currently going to be hitting for 100 damage because of the Fighting Fury onto that Greninja. I won't be able to knock it out this turn, but it will be able to do a significant amount of damage. And I want to discard a few more cards in my hand, just because I will be able to draw onto more with the Corkscrew Smash's ability. So I'm going to use the Computer Search and discard the Ultra Ball, as well as the energy here, so that I can grab onto a Rare Candy, because I did lay down that Machamp last turn, as unfortunately I do not have a Rare Candy in my deck. It looks like it is prized, which is very unfortunate. I was really hoping that I would have a Rare Candy so I could do some additional damage this turn. Looks like I'll be forced to draw into something else though, so I'll just grab hold of the Fighting Stadium so that I can do some additional damage. And I will go ahead and use the Corkscrew Smash here. Going to be hitting for 120 damage, just shy of knocking out that Greninja-EX, unfortunately, so he will be able to do a significant amount of damage to me with that Aqua Blast attack in his next turn. However, I was able to draw onto 4 cards, so I've got quite a number of cards that I can potentially use in my next turn. As my opponent, strangely enough, just attached a Kyogre Spirit Link to his Machamp. I think that must have been a misclick on his part, because he has a Kyogre-EX right next to it that likely would have liked to have that Kyogre Spirit Link quite a bit more than the Machamp there, or future Swampert. So my opponent attaching the double colorless to the Suicune there, so looks like he's trying to stall me out with that Safeguard ability, since it will negate all effects of damage by Pokemon-EX. So seeing that, this is where the Machamp actually comes in handy, since it's not a basic Pokemon. I'm actually going to start attaching energies to the Machamp, just because it does have the option to, once it gets powered up, to knock out that Suicune in one hit. Now, I'm definitely going to knock out the Greninja this turn. Unless I choose to Lysander out one of my opponent's Pokemon, which I think might be the best decision, actually, because his Kyogre is sitting, or his Seismitoad are both sitting there. I think I would actually prefer to KO the Seismitoad, though, because that is particularly threatening. So I'm going to go ahead and use the Corkscrew Smash, hitting for 120 damage onto that Seismitoad-EX there. Important to note here that the Greninja is sitting at 20 HP, so I can always send out a Landorus-EX from my bench here and then snipe it with the Hammerhead to knock it out and draw into 2 prize cards there as well. So normally you want to try to knock things out and not let damage counters sit on Pokemon, but because you are able to so easily snipe Pokemon from your opponent's bench with the Landorus-EX's Hammerhead, I don't see any reason not to do so. Now, I am going to be knocking out the Sidestone-EX, so I'm not particularly sure if I should attach the Muscle Band to the Lucario or to the Machamp, but I know for sure I'm going to attach an energy to that Machamp, since that will be my only way of knocking out that Suicune. I'm not going to need a Muscle Band to knock out Suicune though, so I think I'll actually instead just attach to the Lucario. And I could use a supporter here, but I don't want to discard the Machamp. I need to draw into some prize cards, so hopefully I can get a rare candy. So what I will do is just use the Corkscrew Smash, doing 140 damage. I will draw into some cards and draw into 2 prize cards here, as unfortunately I was not able to get that rare candy that I was looking for. My opponent here switching out, or sending out the Suicune rather, perfectly fine with me, as I do have the Escape Rope in my hand, as well as I have 2 energies attached to this Lucario, which will be enough to retreat out into the Machamp, and KO it next turn with the Machamp Crush. So I was unable to draw into their rare candy, but my opponent's Suicune is not able to KO my Lucario. And I have the Shaymin-EX as well. I'm not going to be using that this turn. I could use the Karina, though, to potentially draw onto a Switch, as I have not used a Switch yet. I think I still have one in my deck. I would prefer to use a Switch so I can KO the Machamp this turn. So what I'm going to do, use the Karina, grab onto the only Fighting-type Pokemon in my deck remaining, which would be that Lucario. And I see the Switch there, so I have it in my hand. I'll go ahead, use the Switch, bring out the Machamp, attach a final energy to it so I'm able to attack with it. And then what I will do is just go ahead and use the Machamp Crush to KO that Suicune, draw onto yet another prize card, as fortunately I did draw onto a rare candy, which is very exciting for me, as I will be able to evolve that final Machamp. Going to be pushing our damage output incredibly high, as my opponent just has not been able to recover at all this entire match. I've just been kind of storming all over him, stomping all over him, that is. My opponent only able to attach a single energy here. I'm wondering if he's running the Deluge Blastoise, which synergizes really well with the Primal Kyogre, since it does require so many energies to use that Tidal Storm attack. But since they have not been able to do so, things are not looking particularly good for my opponent. 2 energies just are not going to be enough for that Primal Kyogre-EX to start attacking my Pokemon. And I'm in a really good position here. They also haven't laid down a Rough Seas as well, so I'm wondering what it is that they're actually running as their stadium card. It seems likely that they would run the Rough Seas. Now let's take a look at the Swampert that they just were able to play. Using that ability, I'm not particularly sure what symbol that is, but when you attach energy from your hand to this Pokemon, you can attach another energy card, I believe is the ability. With the Diving Search ability as well, as you do search your deck for a card and put that on top of your deck, so definitely a good card that I would like to run in a future deck, so I'm actually going to make a note of it right now so that I can remember to do so. As they do have the Archie's Ace in the hole, so let's see if they were able... Oh, they actually grabbed onto another Suicune, so actually running the Shrine of Memory is very interesting. So allowing them to use the Water Pulse attack. Okay, so that's really interesting that they're not running the Rough Seas there. Wow, very interesting. I do have the rare candy though, so I'm going to definitely go ahead and evolve another Machamp, pushing my damage output crazy high. I've got a strong energy and a muscle band already attached to this Lucario, so what I'm going to do is attach both a muscle band and an energy to that Landorus-EX. And what I'll do is use an escape rope here. Going to force my opponent to send out something else. Hopefully they don't choose the Greninja though, as I will be able to snipe that for a prize card. So I'm predicting them to send out the Suicune, honestly, since they see that I won't be able to use this, but looks like they were not particularly smart, as let me check the math here, but 30, 50, 70, 90, I'm going to be able to win this turn. So I'm just going to let my opponent know, good game, since I will be able to knock out the Swampert with my Landorus, as well as snipe the Greninja for enough damage to win the game and draw into 3 prize cards. So that is the fighting type deck. I think I'm just going to end it right there, because you were just able to see just how easy it is to get ridiculously high damage output with the all of the supports that fighting type Pokemon have from the Furious Fists set. So if you enjoyed watching this video of the current fighting type deck, feel free to hit that like, comment, subscribe video or buttons down below, and I will look forward to seeing you next time. If you would also like to see an updated version of this fighting type deck after the rotation takes effect, and we no longer have access to the Landorus-EX, amongst other things, feel free to let me know in a comment down below, and I would love to provide that for you. So, until next time, I'm Diddy. I'll see you guys later. Bye.